Hi! In this video, I'll show you how to use DaVinci Resolve and take footage that is not slow motion and slow it down to get a smooth slow motion result. One of the slow motion settings, called Speed Warp, is only available in the studio or paid version of Resolve, and this is due to the fact that it uses the Blackmagic Neural Engine feature of the paid version of DaVinci Resolve. But all other settings for speed changes will work in the free or paid versions, while the Speed Warp option is available in the free version. If you attempt to apply it to a clip, Resolve will place a watermark over the footage that uses the effect. This tutorial is produced using the paid studio version of Resolve 17. A few notes on video playback speed before we get started. Most video is recorded and played back at one of a number of standard frame rates. Most countries in the Americas and much of Asia use 29.97 or 30 FPS under the NTSC standard. Much of Europe, the UK, and most of the Middle East and Africa use 25 frames per second under the PAL or PAL standard. France, Russia, China, Pakistan, and some other countries use another standard called CCAM that is again 25 frames per second, but all of these standards are incompatible with each other. Motion pictures use 24 frames per second pretty much across the board, with just a few exceptions such as a 60 FPS experiment called ShowScan in the late 70s and Peter Jackson's recent 48 frame per second version of The Hobbit. These high frame rate versions of film have proven unpopular with audiences. This has been attributed to the reduced motion blur and smoothness of the films that reminds people more of TV or a video game than a cinematic film. A lot of video today is shot in 24 frames per second in an effort to emulate the look of film's 24 FPS standard that the world is used to looking at. To create a slow motion effect, the most common method is to shoot at a higher frame rate and play it back at a normal frame rate. Let's take a look at a 60 FPS clip, and I'll play it back at 24 frames per second. Here is the clip in its original 60 FPS frame rate. Now we play it back at 24 frames per second. As you can see, playing back the 60 FPS clip at 24 FPS creates nice, smooth slow motion. The opposite occurs if we record at 24 FPS and then play back at 60. Now the clip is sped up. In Resolve, if I have a clip that was shot at a higher frame rate and I wish to play it back at a slower frame rate or vice versa, I can use the Clip Attributes feature to control this. I can right-click on the clip in the media pool or a timeline, select Clip Attributes, and from there I can tell Resolve what frame rate to play the clip back in. So for this 60 FPS clip, I can set it to 24 frames per second, and it plays it back as slow motion. Depending on the camera that you use, some cameras will let you record at a higher frame rate and the resultant clip is at that frame rate. Other cameras can record at a higher frame rate like 60 or 120 FPS or even more, but provide a clip at a lower frame rate of 24 or 30 FPS so that when you bring the clip into your editing software, you don't need to adjust the playback rate. The slow or fast motion becomes baked into the clip. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's dive in. Each of our clip examples will be 24 frames per second unless otherwise noted. Like most things in Resolve, there is more than one way to skin a cat. To change the speed of a clip in your timeline, click on the clip so that it's selected like this. Now, from the clip menu at the top of the screen, you can select from Change Clip Duration, Change Clip Speed, Freeze Frame, Activate Retime Controls, and finally, an option to reset the retime controls. We will be looking at the retime controls and retime curve in a few minutes. These options can also be accessed by right mouse clicking on the clip in your timeline. Here again, you'll find options for change clip duration, change clip speed, activate retime controls, and finally, an option to activate the retime curve controls. Our last method of changing a clip speed is by using the controls in the inspector on the edit page. If the inspector isn't open, you can enable it by clicking on the upper right inspector option like this. With a clip selected in the timeline, you have the speed change controls in the inspector. These controls allow you to change the speed of the clip forwards or backwards or to create a freeze frame. Note that when you use this freeze frame option, the current frame under the playback head will become the freeze frame image to the end of that selected clip, like this. Also note that by creating a freeze frame resolve will cut your clip at the location of the playhead. Note that the new freeze frame clip's name at the bottom of the clip has a new icon at the left side that looks like a car's analog speedometer. This indicates that the clip has had a speed change applied to it. This will appear as a result of any speed change applied to a clip, not just the freeze frame. Below the speed direction controls is a control for speed percent for speed up or slow down, followed by an FPS control that allows you to change the clip speed by specifying a specific frames per second value. Below that is a duration indicator, and it's useful if you need to stretch or compress the speed of a clip to fit a specific time gap in your edit. Its value will change as you make speed adjustments. Below these controls, we have two checkboxes. The first one for ripple edit, since changing the speed of a given clip will either lengthen the clip in the case of slowing it down or shorten it in the case of speeding it up. This option tells Resolve to trim the length of the clip appropriately in the timeline and to either draw the rest of the timeline to the left or right depending on if you're slowing or speeding up the clip. The checkbox below this is the pitch correction control. Left unchecked, clips that are slowed will have audio that is lower in pitch than normal, and clips sped up will have audio that is higher in pitch than normal. Enabling this control tells Resolve to attempt to correct the pitch of the audio. Since none of our example clips use audio, the pitch correction checkbox will be disabled. Our final set of controls for changing clip speed are at the bottom of the inspector under Retime and Scaling. For this video, we do not care about the scaling settings, only the retime settings. They are in the top two drop-downs. The first being the retime process. Within this drop-down, we have four options. Project settings, which will use whatever motion settings are set to in the main project settings window. Then we have nearest. This setting is the most processor efficient and least sophisticated method of processing. Frames are either dropped for fast motion or duplicated for slow motion. Following this, we have frame blend. This is also processor efficient, but can produce smoother results. Adjacent duplicated frames are dissolved together to smooth out slow or fast motion effects. This option can provide better results when optical flow displays unwanted artifacts. And finally, we have optical flow, the most processor-intensive but highest quality method of speed effect processing. Using motion estimation, new frames are generated from the original source frames to create slow or fast motion effects. The result can be exceptionally smooth when motion in a clip is linear. However, two moving elements crossing in different directions or unpredictable camera movement can cause unwanted artifacts. The next drop-down, Motion Estimation, is only used when the retime process is set to optical flow. Motion Estimation pop-up lets you choose the best-looking rendering option for a particular clip. Each method has different artifacts, and the highest quality option isn't always the best choice for a particular clip. Again, we have project settings just as the previous setting. This is followed by standard faster and standard better. They're more processor efficient and yield good quality results that are suitable for most situations. Next is Enhanced Faster and Enhanced Better. These should yield superior results in nearly every case where the standard options exhibit artifacts at the expense of being more computationally intensive and thus slower on most systems. And finally, we have the coup de grace speed warp. It's available for even higher quality slow motion effects using DaVinci's artificial intelligence neural engine. It's only available without a watermark in the studio or paid version of Resolve. Your results with this setting will vary according to the content of the clip, but in ideal circumstances, this will yield higher visual quality with fewer artifacts than even the Enhanced Better setting. This setting is only available on a clip-by-clip basis. It's not available in the project settings. As a general rule of thumb, when changing a clip's speed using these tools, you should start with the least sophisticated settings and work your way up until you get an acceptable result. Using optical flow in combination with speed warp will bring most systems to their knees. As a result, apply these effects as the last part of your processing workflow, since any changes made to a clip after you apply these effects will force Resolve to recalculate the speed changes you've applied. Before we start changing clip speeds, I want to make one recommendation to you here. In the menu system, under Playback, select Render Cache and then select the Smart option. This will allow Resolve to render the timeline for real-time playback. That being said, when I use the Speed Warp option in this video, I will demonstrate its results using pre-rendered clips, since Speed Warp will bring my system to a standstill. These pre-rendered clips are generated using the right mouse click context menu in the timeline and choosing the Render in Place option to generate a pre-rendered version of the clip. Once a clip is pre-rendered, your settings and changes will all be baked into the clip, so it's best to only use that option towards the end of your post-processing workflow, if at all. Our first clip that we're going to use the speed changes on is this clip of two boys riding a water slide. The boy in the front of the shot is using an action camera on a selfie stick to take this shot. Due to the nature of this clip, it's a bad choice for applying speed change effects, as you'll see in a moment. I'll press Shift-Z here to zoom the timeline a bit. I'll confirm my playback render is set to Smart. Now I right-click on the clip. We see the retime controls are available for the currently selected clip using either this menu, or I can press Command-R on the Mac or Control-R on Windows. During this video, I'll be using the retime controls exclusively for changing clip speeds. With the water slide selected, I press Command-R and bring up the retime controls on the clip. It reveals a set of blue arrows along the top pointing to the right that indicate the playback direction of the clip and that it is playing at normal speed. If it is slowed down, the arrows will be yellow. If it's sped up, they remain blue but become a denser set of arrows like this. I'll move the playhead to this spot right here where the boy in front is just opening his mouth. The retime controls offer a drop-down with a number of options that include setting a preset retime speed value and some other options that we'll be exploring here in a few moments. I'll click the drop-down control and select Add Speed Point. Notice that there is now a new drop-down to the left of the playhead and speed point control that was just added. This allows us to add a new speed point before the current one. We can also add one to the right of the current speed point, and that's what we'll do here. Speed points allow us to specify sections of a clip where we wish to change playback speed. We can set two speed points and change the playback speed between them, or set a single speed point and change the speed between the speed point and the end of the clip as well. I'll move the playback head to where he closes his mouth and add another speed point. Now the drop-down in between the speed points can be used to select a preset speed value from a list like so. If no other speed point existed to the left or right of the current one, any speed changes would be applied between the current speed point and the end of the clip. Instead of selecting a preset speed from the drop-down, I'll drag this rightmost speed point to the right using its top handle to lengthen the clip and slow its duration like this. The bottom handle on the speed point lets you move the speed point without changing the speed of the clip. Notice that the drop-down that I used to create the speed point no longer says 100%, but instead now indicates the amount of slowdown that I've applied to the section between the speed points. Dragging the speed point to the left again will remove the slowdown, and once we're past 100, it will start to speed the clip up. Now let's say you want to change the speed of the entire clip. You can eschew using the retime controls and just set an overall speed value using the inspector. Or, if you prefer, you can enable the retime controls, and then if you hover over the upper left or right of the retime control header on the clip, you'll see a black two-sided arrow. You can use this to set the overall speed of the clip as needed. You can also use this control to change the speed of a portion of a clip between the end of the clip and a speed point. If I add a speed point and use this control, it will affect the area between the end of the clip and the speed point only. Alternatively, you can click on the drop-down in the retime controls and select a preset retime value from the Change Speed menu, as well as reset the time back to 100% or remove the speed point that is to the left of the drop-down. You can also select Freeze Frame. This will make the current frame under the playhead a 2-second freeze frame. You can drag the handles for it to control its duration. Below that is the Rewind option. Choose a preset percentage from the Rewind submenu. This results in 2 additional speed points being added after the rightmost speed point in the current segment. This creates the effect of the current segment playing in fast reverse for the chosen percentage and then playing a second time from the beginning, kind of like what you might do on your DVR to see a segment of a show over again. Under the Rewind option is the Speed Ramp option. It will ramp the speed of a clip up or down as you choose, but only from a speed of 0 and then up or down. I find this effect and the rewind useless, as there are better tools that we'll look at for achieving a speed ramp effect in just a bit. Okay, now that we have our clip retimed, we can see that it's set to about 30%. I'll use the retime setting of nearest and let it play. As you can see, it's very stuttery and jerky, so we'll need something else here. I'll try Frame Blend, let it render on the timeline. Playing it back, it's smoother, but there are a lot of artifacts. Stopping here at 7:05 and stepping forward a frame at a time, you can see all kinds of artifacts around the boys. Okay, let's try the next setting of optical flow. Again, the timeline will need to be rendered. Playing it back, it's better, but still tons of artifacts. Stopping at 6:21 and stepping a frame at a time, we can see there are a ton of artifacts. Look at the arm of the boy in the back. We still have more options using motion estimation with optical flow than we had with the other 2 settings, so let's have a look at those. Standard faster looks like this. It's basically the same as optical flow by itself. Standard better is a slight improvement. Enhanced faster is a much better, but again, if I stop at 12:12 and step forward a frame at a time, again, there are some issues with the arm on the boy in the rear. Enhanced better looks much better. Let's look at that trouble spot at 12:12 again, with the arm again real quick. Still some trouble there, but overall improved. Depending on what you're doing and your needs, this might be acceptable. Okay, the final test is with Speed Warp. I pre-rendered this clip using that setting since it brings my machine to its knees. Looking at the highest setting using Speed Warp here, we now see that it's overall much improved with one glaring exception. This tree in the background has a significant warp occurring with it. If I had no choice here, I would either choose another section of this clip that gives a better result with Speed Warp, or use this section with Enhanced Better and Optical Flow and live with the small issue on the arm. Our next clip is a bike rider. I've selected a section of the clip and slowed it to 25%. Instead of going through all the previous settings, I'll save us some time as the lower settings don't produce acceptable results on this clip. It's currently set to frame blend, and when I turn on the retime effect, frame blend gives us some very choppy results. I'll set it to optical flow and enhanced better. Now look at the foliage along the side of the road. Lots of warping and other issues here. These are caused by motion blur in the clip. Retiming is always affected by motion blur, so that's something to keep in mind. I've pre-rendered Speed Warp. Looking at that, we see a much better looking result. In this instance, Speed Warp is probably our best bet. Okay, let's look at one last clip that is actually much more suited to retiming. Here we have a group of folks that are using treadmill machines, and there's a pretty subtle camera movement. As we've seen, sudden camera moves can cause issues, so this clip should be ideal. I've set this example here to use optical flow and enhanced better. With just optical flow and enhanced better, we're getting a very good result that's very usable. One final element that we'll look at here is speed ramping. In each of the examples provided here, the footage speed goes from normal to slow with a sudden transition. We can ease in and out of the slow motion effect using a technique called speed ramping. The retime controls offer a feature to speed ramp up or down from 0%, but that obviously limits what you can do with it. Moreover, it's not a real speed ramp, but more of a speed stepping feature. To do a real speed ramp, we'll need to enable the retime curve controls. I'll use the treadmill clip that we used earlier to demonstrate this. Right mouse clicking on the clip that I've already added retiming to, I can enable the retime curve controls like this. Now we have a window that shows what appear to be keyframes where our speed points are defined. At the upper left, click on the drop-down that currently says Retime Frame. At the bottom of the list, uncheck the Retime Frame and check Retime Speed. Click on Retime Speed again if you don't see a curve like I'm showing here to ensure it's enabled. Clicking on one of the keyframe-looking elements that define the speed points selects it and changes its color to orange. At the top are two option buttons for the speed point. The leftmost one will allow us to feather the speed point's acceleration, and the rightmost one will make the speed point's acceleration linear. I'll click on the leftmost feathered control like this, and now we can see we have handles that will allow us to soften the acceleration curve of the speed point. By clicking and dragging these handles, I can create a gradual transition into the retime portion of the clip and speed ramp the change. This also works on the outbound speed point, as you can see here, and you can see how it creates a nice gradual curve instead of a sharp transition. Here's a before and an after with the speed ramp applied. At any point in your footage where you've applied a speed point, you can use this retime curve to create a speed ramping effect. Or you can click this diamond up here to create another speed point and drag left and right to position it, change its speed with the drop down or the speed handle in the clip area, or by dragging the line in the graph up and down. That way you can make it faster or slower as you see fit. You can click on the speed point keyframe in the graph and press delete to remove it. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you got something out of it. Don't forget to leave the retiming as your very last step before you output. Always try the lowest settings and work your way up until you get an acceptable result. Additionally, I found that slowing past 25% in general produces unacceptable results. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, please click like, as that helps other folks find it. And until the next video, take care.